her position on why she opted not to address the Youth Transition Service hold.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Chairman, there is no two ways about it. Change is on the way, and this is certainly going to have a completely different way in which we work with young people. Certainly this first bill of our welfare reforms are going to show us putting an attention on those whom we see at times as being most vulnerable that they have never had before. There is absolutely no doubt about it that we looked at who is going on to benefit, and it hadn't really been done before. So when we looked at the pipeline of who was going on and how long they were likely to stay there, it won't be rocket science to know that evidence said the younger you go on, the more likely you are to stay on welfare for long periods of time. If you go on as a teen parent, then you are more likely to have subsequent children while on benefit and be there for very long periods of time. So it's kind of, I wouldn't say easy, but it's one thing to turn around and say, how are you working with those that are on welfare? Where are you setting the age of when you work test? When are you making sure that you're putting the right work tests around people? It is quite a different scenario to say, how are we going to work with them before they even get there? And that was a big call. It was a big call for government to look at it quite differently, because in some respects, from work and incomes perspective, if you like, and from a welfare perspective, if you wanted to be pure, they weren't our problem. They kind of weren't our problem until they came on at 18. But of course, that's not a Ministry of Social Development's approach to this, and that's certainly not this government's approach to this. Because in some respects, working with them earlier was going to get a difference. Now, often when I talk about this stuff, I think actually we could go back real early, because the reality for most of these young people at 16 and 17 years old, the reality for them is that for many of them they have had a poor upbringing. For many of them, school has not worked. If it had, they would still be there. For many of them, they are the lost and ignored and forgotten. And it just seemed wrong to me that they might get ad hocly picked up if we're lucky, you know, but the information was not flowing between education and the ministry. I would say we have taken the components of what we know works and then expanded it. I make no apologies for my concentration on 16 and 17-year-olds, although there will be some room in this for them to work with 15-year-olds as well. And no matter which way you looked at it, it's expensive. You know, this is where you go. Is it expensive that they spend 10 years on welfare and on benefit? Is it expensive that we actually try and work with them when they're 21, 22 or when they're 30? It is expensive to work with them when they're 16 and 17-year-old when you add it all together, but in respect for the opportunity that we have to change their lives, it's an investment that we want to give. So as we say, there's about 3,000 young people aged 16 and 17 and young parents, so teen parents aged 18 as well, about 3,000 of them. Then add to that, if you like, about 11,000 what we term as NEET, not in education, employment or training. Altogether you've got about 14,000, I count, that are NEET as such. And yes, we are going to give a different amount depending on their risk, because otherwise you see them just working with those that are easier to put in. So we make it outcome-based. We say to the organisations that are working with them, these are the outcomes we want. And actually the opposition member picked up on NCEA Level 2. I make no apologies, because every bit of evidence, international, local, upside down, sideways, tells you that for them to gain that kind of education achievement is the best chance that they have of having a successful life. The best chance they have of staying off welfare, of actually getting a job that is meaningful, that will actually take the ups and downs of lives and economies and everything else, is if they have that education behind them. And I can say to you now that not every kid's going to get NCEA Level 2, but quite frankly, to think that they deserve for us to strive for something less than that for them is appalling. So we will strive for NCEA Level 2 for them with everything that we have, and we will incentivise and reward those providers that get them through to NCEA Level 2. Some will take longer. Yeah? So for some it will take a long period of time for those young people to get there, and what we're asking is for them to head towards it. They are getting time actually, and the members yelling out they're not getting time, actually we're going to work with them for years. Actually, we're going to work with them for years, and that's the reality. And when you look at the funding that is coming from the Youth Guarantee, of which we have over 10,000 places now, these are the very young people that are going into them. Then you add to that these substantial sort of thousands of dollars, Mr. Chairman, who are going to get the support that comes alongside of them, and actually whether that is making sure that they're picked up in the morning and taken to that course of that training, making sure that actually it is engaging and how their brains work quite differently and need to be in some respects turned on in a different way, if you like, so that they can get that buzz of learning and education that leads to those sorts of qualifications. We see fantastic examples of it. You know, whether it is via the kinds of trades training and more hands-on, whether it's got a work-based experience to it, whether it is in a different environment that actually gets their brains thinking, we have tried to make them valuable. And I make no bones about that. What we've also done is, as I said, paying more for those whom we consider high risk. Mr. Chairman, this is different. Yeah, how many times and in which ways? There are payment cards, and their benefits are going to go on for those 3,000 onto a payment card. That provider is going to work alongside the young people. I mean, out in the last few weeks, really talking to them about what this means and how it looks for them. And the young people themselves, as much as I don't like to admit it to some of my those fantastic workers, but some of them it's quite exciting. They're not going to have to go to work and income as much. They kind of like that they get to have a real relationship with a provider that they know that is basic. And you know, I mean, I know what that means in the context of it all. But for them, they sort of see that as a more welcoming environment, and they have someone advocating on their behalf. So they get that kind of connection there, and they're kind of pleased about that. That assistance to actually with the budgeting programs. You know, look at how new this is. We've never had social obligations like this attached to a benefit before, and these are. So there are going to be obligations on teen parents, for example, to be doing a parenting course for them to and have their children engage with a PHO, for them to do their well child checks. Never before has that been so directly linked to the benefit system, and it will be in this case, and that, Mr. Chairman, makes major sort of changes there that we've not seen before. When it came to the commencement date, I mean, here we are in the committee stage in this House now. We want to give, really, once we go through the process of everything we need to do, we want to give people at least 2 weeks to be getting all of the notice they need for the change that was coming up. Actually, the providers are ready, you know, when we speak to them, but the extra training that will go in so that they can pick it up will be well needed from them, they tell me. Their contract will start on the 1st of August, so they're not going to miss out on any payments. So, you know, they see that time as really getting ready for when it turns over on the 20th of August and having the opportunity to do that. And I think that that's the right way for us to go. It's one thing for us to say there was this kind of fantastic program that was running before, and yes, we are funding parts of them through work and income in different ways. But when did they last work with kids that had severe disabilities and needed help that was quite different? When were they working with young people who have convictions or have drug and alcohol dependency problems, and they are high risk and they need far more intervention and they are expensive? And with all respect to some of the programs that we saw, they weren't working with those really difficult kids that we see, particularly in the bigger cities in high numbers. And so they are going to take a different approach. You know, how do we get a more cultural element to it that is going to actually engage those Māori and Pacific and Asian kids that need it quite differently actually than what we see otherwise. The change in the law for the information sharing is a vital part of the sort of change that we're making, and something we haven't seen before. So what we had was, in some respects, we had a relationship with schools where they did pass on information, but none of the schools felt particularly comfortable about it. They weren't sure they had permission and how it looked and whether they should be, and it never happened in real time. So you could have literally a young person dropping out of school at 15, 16, 17, and there being, if you're lucky, months in between a provider actually then knowing, but in many cases them not knowing at all. With this change, it will be happening in real time, information passed on to that provider via the Ministry of Social Development, via Work and Income, that provides good information, good knowledge on what's happening, the sooner we pick them up, the bigger we can make a difference. You know, is this going to be perfect? Of course it's not. We're going to have to work our way through, and not just kind of partnership, because that always sounds like two people. It's going to take that whole community approach that's going to see it, and we're going to need to keep that relationship. We're going to need to keep tweaking as we go. I mean, one of the things we've done is we've said we'll have work and income in the actual with the youth provider for the first few weeks, so that we don't mess up their benefits at all, and we make sure there is some consistency.
I call Jan Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.